BoJack Horseman has the greatest title sequence of all time, and you're gonna have a really hard time convincing me otherwise. It's one of those intros that I absolutely refuse to skip anytime I'm watching the show. But this incredible sequence isn't just an amazing work of art in itself, it's also jam-packed with show-accurate details that change alongside the events of the series. Some of these details are small, some are big, but all of them correspond to something in the actual narrative of the show. Adult animation has a long history of episodic changes in their title sequences, the most obvious example being The Simpsons couch gags. But BoJack's take on this practice is as unique as the series itself, and often the details actually offer incredible insight into the story and themes. So let's dive into this legendary title sequence and break down every tiny detail it has to offer. Spoilers ahead for the entire BoJack Horseman series, and yes, I have talked about these details before, but I missed some, and I know I can do it better now, so there. The title sequence for BoJack Horseman is already brilliant on its own. Season after season, BoJack continues going through the same motions over and over again. As his surroundings change, as people in his life come and go, BoJack stays the same. It's a beautiful representation of BoJack's own journey throughout most of the series, the ongoing cycle of self-destruction. And of course, the intro sequence itself doesn't change fundamentally until season 6, the season where BoJack actually works to better himself and make those changes that he desperately needs. But while we can appreciate this work of art on a larger scale, let's dive into the tiny details. In episode 103, we see Todd jumping on BoJack's bed, breaking one of the legs of the bed as a result. Starting in 104, the title sequence replaces the bed's leg with a stack of books or magazines. In that same episode, we also see Sarah Lynn light BoJack's ottoman on fire, and of course in the title sequence following this episode, the ottoman is burned as well. In episode 106, our A story is a D story, BoJack steals the D from the Hollywood sign in an attempt to win over Diane. In subsequent title sequences, the D is missing from the sign in the background, and of course Hollywood is referred to as Hollywood for the rest of the series. These are the only changes we see in season 1's title sequence, but they start to ramp it up in subsequent years. There is one major difference in season 2's title sequence. Instead of moving through a grocery store, we see BoJack moving through the set for the movie Secretariat, a part that he booked at the end of season 1. A minor change is that instead of the books or papers that were propping up BoJack's bed, we now see the Golden Globe that he won at the end of season 1. Another is in the party scene of the title sequence, Sarah Lynn's music video changes to news anchor Tom Jumbo Grumbo interviewing activist Sebastian St. Clair. We also see that BoJack's old couch has been replaced with a nice new red couch, an event that happens in the very first episode of season 2, aptly titled Brand New Couch. In episode 202, Yesterdayland, BoJack starts dating an owl named Wanda, played by the legend Lisa Kudrow, and in the second episode of the season, the two decide very suddenly that they should move in together. So of course, starting at episode 3, we see Wanda hanging out in the living room of BoJack's house during the titles. In episode 206, Higher Love, BoJack actually fixes the leg of his bed, which of course fixes the bed in the title sequence. Episode 206 also ends on a tragic note as BoJack's Secretariat co-star Corduroy Jackson is found dead in his trailer. Starting in episode 207's titles, Corduroy disappears from the Secretariat film set. At the end of episode 207, Hank After Dark, Mr. Peanut Butter urges Diane to leave Hollywood and help people in war-torn Cordovia with war hero Sebastian St. Clair. Diane and Mr. Peanut Butter then disappear from the set of Secretariat as a result. In episode 209, The Shot, BoJack and the director of Secretariat, Kelsey Jennings, attempt to shoot a scene of the film on their own despite being prohibited from doing so by producer Lenny Turtletop. Because of this, Kelsey is fired from the project by Lenny and replaced with Abe DeCatfish, which is also represented on the Secretariat film set in the titles. In episode 210, Yes and Wanda and BoJack break up, so, of course, Wanda is gone from all the title sequences thereafter. Episode 211 actually takes place in New Mexico in a situation completely new to BoJack, so we actually get an entirely new sitcom-like title sequence for this episode. Kyle and the kids, Kyle's the dad and Charlotte's married to him. And that does it for season 2, so let's move on to season 3. The major scene change from season 2 to 3 is the set of Secretariat is now the red carpet premiere of Secretariat. The first minor change we see is on the TV during the party scene. Tom Jumbo Grumbo's interview now changes to an interview with pop sensation Sextina Aquafina, who's featured more heavily this season. And the last minor change between seasons is that the boat BoJack buys in New Mexico in season 2 can now be seen sitting in his driveway. This next one is really tough to catch. In episode 305, Love and or Marriage, Diane breaks her arm. So, if you look very closely in the title sequence for 306, you can see she's wearing her blue cast under her jacket. That is ridiculous attention to detail. Next is episode 307, Stop the Presses, and this one actually has a few. First off, in Stop the Presses, Todd and Emily start a new rideshare business called Cabra Cadabra and set up shop in BoJack's house. So as you would expect in the intro for 308, the business is in BoJack's living room as he moves through it. Second, it appears that Diane has disappeared from BoJack's house. Diane does say in this season that she's been avoiding spending as much time with BoJack because he brings out some of her bad tendencies, but that doesn't happen in 306, so I'm not 100% sure why they removed her here, but it still fits with her character at least. least. And lastly, at the end of episode 307, character actress Margot Martindale steals BoJack's boat, and therefore it disappears from his driveway in subsequent episodes. Next, in episode 308, Old Acquaintances, Todd hires the orca dancers from Whale World to become the new drivers for Cabracadabra. So, in 309, all of the human employees are replaced with orcas. In 309, best thing that ever happened, BoJack fires Princess Carolyn as his agent because of a major mess up in booking him some roles. So starting in episode 310, Princess Carolyn can no longer be seen in BoJack's kitchen. In episode 310, It's You, BoJack is told he's been nominated for an Oscar and goes on a massive party binge to celebrate. During this binge, he backs a car through his glass windows and into his pool, and then at the end of the episode, he and Todd have a major falling out. Starting in episode 311, there is a mess in the living room, massive hole in his windows, and Todd is of course gone.
Fuck, man. What else is there to say?
And finally, the absolute saddest example of these title sequence Easter eggs. In episode 311, That's Too Much Man, BoJack and Sarah Lynn go on a massive drug bender that lasts weeks, and in the end, of course, Sarah Lynn dies of an overdose at the planetarium. In the final episode of the season, Sarah Lynn can no longer be seen in the party segment of the title sequence, which she's been in for the first 3 seasons. Throughout season 3, BoJack alienates everyone close to him in his life, and fittingly, at the end of the season, he's all alone in the title sequence. One other thing I noticed is that in seasons 1 through 3, in the grocery store, Secretariat set, and Secretariat premiere, Todd is always knocking something over or falling. I thought this was just a fun recurring gag, but the end of season 3 is also when Todd significantly removes himself from BoJack's life, and interestingly, Todd stops stumbling and falling in the title sequence after this. It's a pretty smart representation of the growth that Todd is exhibiting. On to season 4, one of the most interesting title sequences in the show. There are a couple very minor changes from season 3's finale. His house is still a mess, however, the only difference in this scene for season 4 is that Cabracadabra's sign from Todd's business has now disappeared. The next minor changes we see are in the party scene. The empty space that was previously occupied by Sarah Lynn now features Katrina Peanut Butter, who plays a much bigger role in this season. And the last minor change we see is that instead of the interview with Tom Jumbo Grumbo and Sixtina Aquafina, we see a clip of California Governor Woodchuck Kudchuck Berkowitz, who of course runs against Mr. Peanut Butter for the duration of this season. Next is the major change we see in the title sequence this season. Normally we get a scene change between BoJack's kitchen and the party every year, but this time we get something much stranger. An incredibly trippy kaleidoscope-like sequence showcasing many of the people who have shaped BoJack's life. Among these people we see Princess Carolyn, Todd, Herb Kazaz, BoJack's TV children from Horsin Around, BoJack's parents Beatrice and Butterscott next to a very young BoJack, and finally Kelsey Jannings. Most of these seem to be people that BoJack has hurt in his life, except for of course Beatrice and Butterscotch, who probably hurt BoJack more than he hurt them. The first continuity change we see comes between episode 403 and 404. In 403, Todd meets a young horse named Hollyhock who thinks BoJack might be her father. The two of them pretend that Hollyhock is BoJack's maid, which leads to Todd cleaning the entirety of BoJack's house as well as fixing his window. This is of course then reflected in the title sequence. By the end of the episode, we find out that BoJack and Hollyhock do indeed share DNA, and in the cold open of 404, BoJack tells Hollyhock she can stay with him. After this, we can see Hollyhock on the couch in BoJack's living room, as well as eating a toaster strudel in the kitchen. The next changes happen between episodes 405 and 406. In 405, titled Thoughts and Prayers, BoJack upsets Beatrice in her nursing home and she subsequently pushes over another patient. Because of this incident, she is kicked out of the nursing home. After this, she and her nurse Tina move in with BoJack, so we can see her various belongings throughout BoJack's house now. We also see Tina and Beatrice in the living room and then again in the kitchen. Additionally, instead of eating a toaster strudel, Hollyhock is now drinking coffee that has been served to her by Beatrice. This comes into play in a big way later. The coffee maker can also now be seen on BoJack's counter, and Hollyhock has moved some of her stuff in as well. We can see 2 of her bags, her carrot pillow, and a little photo collage taped to BoJack's window. The final changes we see come between episodes 410 and 411. In episode 410, titled Lovin' That Cali Lifestyle, Hollyhock overdoses on amphetamines and is taken home by her dads. Here is where this year's title sequence gets really interesting. Remember how we see Beatrice serving Hollyhock coffee in the title sequence? Well, it turns out that she had been spiking the coffee with weight loss amphetamines. This is what caused Hollyhock to overdose. But I think this could also explain why the new scene in this year's intro is this trippy sequence. After BoJack takes a sip of the coffee, his eyes dilate and the visuals come into play, and as he passes through the kaleidoscope, he looks increasingly worried. Sure seems to me like this is a hint that the coffee was drugged. When BoJack finds out that Beatrice drugged Hollyhock, he takes Beatrice to live in a new nursing home. From here on out in the title sequence, we can see that Beatrice, Tina, and Hollyhock have all disappeared from BoJack's house, leaving him alone once again. They have, however, left some things behind. Beatrice's belongings and box of mail can still be seen. We also see that Hollyhock's carrot pillow was left behind, as well as the leftover tape on BoJack's window from her collage. And lastly, the coffee maker remains on the counter, but now the coffee pot sits inside of it. Let's move along to season 5. The first difference we're going to see is that instead of Horsin Around playing on BoJack's TV, we actually get a little memorial for Ralph Carney. Ralph was a legendary musician who died before the season, and his nephew Patrick Carney actually produced the amazing BoJack Horseman theme song that we all know and love. Second, Beatrice's belongings have been removed for this season. Also, Hollyhock's carrot pillow has disappeared, as well as the tape that was left all over the window from the photos of her family. The last thing in this scene is that the coffee maker Beatrice used to drug Hollyhock is no longer on the counter. The major scene change in this year's intro is that instead of the trippy drug sequence from season 4, we see the set of Filbert, BoJack's brand new TV show. Of course, the set of Filbert looks pretty much exactly like BoJack's house, even down to the burned ottoman. They actually explain that the production designer was inspired by David Boreanaz's house, a callback to when Todd pretended BoJack's house was Boreanaz's house. Genius callback. The set scene also features BoJack's co-star Gina, who's listening to a corn-centric musical on her iPod. This ostrich crew member, Filbert showrunner Flip McVicker, Princess Carolyn on 2 phones as she struggles to balance her personal life and professional life, and of course Todd. In the party scene, we've got a couple small changes. Instead of Katrina Peanut Butter, we see Mr. Peanut Butter's soon-to-be girlfriend Pickles the Pug. Additionally, here on the TV, we lose the shot of Woodchuck Kutchuck Berkowitz, which is replaced with an episode of Morning Time Hollywood with a Ryan Seacrest type, who is talking about BoJack's new series, Filbert. Then between episodes 501 and 502, instead of Ralph Carney's In Memoriam on the TV, we actually see a clip of Filbert. In the Filbert set scene, Todd's clothes change from his normal getup to a suit after he gets a new job as president of ad sales for whattimeisitRightNow.com. He's also signing some paperwork given to him by his secretary. Todd is also seen wearing the same suit in the party scene from here on out. And the last change in this episode is that when Diane and Mr. Peanut Butter are looking down on BoJack in the pool, Diane now has her spiffy new post-divorce haircut. We don't see any more changes until between episodes 503 and 504. BoJack starts seeing his new Filbert co-star Gina. So as expected, Gina can now be seen in BoJack's house, in the living room listening to her headphones, and in the kitchen eating an apple. Then between episodes 504 and 505, we get a lot of changes to the Filbert set scene. Some new crew members join the set, including the Squid production assistant, Mr. Peanut Butter, who is cast as Filbert's partner Fritz, the sound guy / boom operator, who is a snake, good physical comedy, and also Diane, who is hired as a consultant for Filbert to help prevent sexism in the writing of the series. Between episodes 506 and 507, we get probably the most fun intro changes we've ever seen. This episode is framed around Diane's therapist telling her wife a story about BoJack, Diane, and the crew, but due to doctor-patient confidentiality, she changes the names and identities of the characters. For this reason, BoJack becomes
Bobo, the angsty zebra.
And so in our intro sequence, BoJack is now a zebra instead of a horse. This gets pretty detailed too. The frame photos and magazines on his wall used to show BoJack, but now feature Bobo the Angsty Zebra. The name of his show is also changed from Horsin Around to Stripin' Around. BoJack also changes the Bobo in the scene of Filbert seen on his TV in both the living room and in the party scene. And finally, the title of the series changes from BoJack Horseman to Bobo the Angsty Zebra. Then between episodes 507 and 508, Bobo changes back to BoJack for the duration, and the only other change we see is during the party scene. In this shot, you can now see Mr. Peanut Butter at BoJack's party, but he's actually dressed up as his character Fritz from their show Filbert. This is to illustrate that the lines between BoJack's show and real life are continuing to blur. This party scene is part of his normal life, not his TV life, yet a character from his TV life is infiltrating. It's a really cool detail. Then between episodes 508 and 509, we get another similar life blurring detail. Instead of wearing his robe through his house in the morning, BoJack is now wearing his costume from Filbert. So like I said, further illustrations that the lines between his real life and TV life are increasingly unclear. We actually start to see BoJack wearing his Filbert costume offset throughout the end of the season as well. Then in episode 511, we get a unique intro sequence. Instead of the normal BoJack titles, we get an intro for the series Filbert. This is a really cool title sequence, and in general, I really love seeing the TV series that exist within the BoJack universe. And finally, between episodes 511 and the final episode of the season, we see a couple last changes. Gina has now left BoJack's house. She broke up with him because of his drug problem, and of course the horrifying choking incident on the set of Filbert. Next, we see that Diane is no longer on the set of Filbert either. She quit the show after season 1 because she disagreed with the content they were putting out there. She also has a big falling out with BoJack. And the last change we see is that Princess Carolyn is no longer on set. Nothing happens between episodes 511 and 512 to make PC leave the set, but I think this has to do with the fact that in the final episode of the season, Princess Carolyn bails pretty quickly instead of finding a new home for Filbert after the show is canceled. She also finally adopts a child, and her priorities change significantly with this major life event. And then we're on the final season, which is a whole different journey title-wise. The very first episode's title sequence is definitely the most unique. It starts with the old title sequence we remember from the first 5 seasons before it burns away like a piece of old film. This might appear to be just a trippy remix, but it actually ties in thematically to the season really closely. Throughout the first episode, we see sad and regretful memories of BoJack's past. Every time one of these painful flashback memories ends, it burns away in the same way we saw in the title sequence. sequence. This essentially implies that the old title sequence, and really the entirety of the first 5 seasons of the show, also represent painful memories for BoJack. This first episode shows that old title sequence burn away, making way for the brand new one starting in episode 2. Now obviously up until this point we've dealt with continuity details found in the title sequence, but there's really actually only one of those to break down this season, but the new title sequence does represent incredibly important moments from BoJack's history, so let's dive into what those mean. Right off the bat, the new sequence showcases this trippy, colorful starscape, which is from the planetarium the night Sarah Lynn died in BoJack's arms. This season deals a lot with BoJack's guilt from his part in Sarah Lynn's death, and the starscape imagery recurs during moments of regret and weakness throughout the season. The first scene we see is BoJack in his dressing room for Horsin Around, sporting his longer hair and Horsin Around sweater. This moves into the set of Horsin Around, and we see Sarah Lynn, who appears to be somewhere around 7 or 8 years old, staring vacantly and sadly while sitting at the set's table. BoJack's expression becomes sad during this section, again due to the part he played in Sarah Lynn's death. Next we see Herb Kazaz step out of the director's chair and turn to camera. This places the scene somewhere in the early 90s, before Herb was fired in 1994. BoJack concertedly looks at Herb when the painful memory burns away, revealing the next, another shot of Herb in his Malibu bedroom, skinny and frail from his battle with cancer. This represents another of BoJack's major regrets. He never made up with Herb after he was fired from Horsin Around. BoJack abandoned Herb when he was unfairly fired, and in episode 108, The Telescope, BoJack attempts to make up with Herb here in his Malibu home. Herb dies without ever forgiving BoJack. Next, a few balloons filled with glow sticks float by, wiping the screen, revealing Tasuka, New Mexico. These are the events of 211, Escape from LA, when BoJack went to prom with Penny. This episode features some of the most shameful things in BoJack's life and in the series. That burns away to reveal the dark and dingy hallway of Whale World from the season 3 episode BoJack Kills. The words BoJack Kills are also written on the wall here, which is in reference to the strain of heroin named after BoJack. The same strain of heroin that Sarah Lynn overdosed on in 311. That's too much, man. Some water flows upwards, placing BoJack under the sea. 304 is fish out of water, when BoJack goes to Pacific Ocean City for a film festival. This is famously an episode almost entirely devoid of dialogue, and it also represents some of BoJack's regrets in his relationship with film director Kelsey Jennings, who was fired from the movie Secretariat. Similar to Herb, BoJack was scared to reach out and connect after her firing. This burns again to reveal episode 402, The Old Sugarman Place, my personal favorite episode of the series. This takes place at his family's abandoned lake house following the events of Sarah Lynn's overdose. It's a house filled with traumatic memories and history for both BoJack and his mother Beatrice, and at the end of the episode, BoJack tears it down. This burns away, revealing Beatrice Horseman in a nursing home where BoJack took her in episode 411, Time's Arrow. This was also the last moment BoJack ever connected with his mother, and where he left her shortly before her death. BoJack's face clearly still carries anger and resentment here. This burns away to reveal the funeral in 506, Free Churro, the Emmy-nominated episode where BoJack eulogizes his mother for the entire 25-minute runtime. Next, we see 510, Head in the Clouds, the premiere of BoJack's TV show Filbert. This was an evening where BoJack was berated and called out for his actions by his best friend Diane. It's also the night that he went public with his relationship with co-star Gina Cazador, and probably the saddest thing about this section is the sad look on Gina's face as her gaze follows BoJack across the frame. This then jumps to the Griffith Observatory. The starscape from the night of Sarah Lynn's death has returned. This place is incredibly significant for BoJack. It's where Herb told him that they were going to make Horsin Around together. It's where BoJack contemplated his life at the end of season 1 after winning his Golden Globe, and it's where Sarah Lynn died in his arms. Next, we see BoJack fall off the ledge of the observatory in the same way he used to fall off the balcony of his house, and lands back in the pool once again, just like in the old title sequence. And then between 7 and 8, we get our only continuity changes for season 6. In one scene, we see Diane now living in Chicago with her boyfriend Guy. She's sporting a new jacket and is looking a bit heavier than before. I know from experience how easy it can be to gain weight living in a place like Chicago, but the real implication here is that Diane started taking her antidepressants. She struggled with depression in season 6 and mentions to BoJack that the medication usually makes her gain weight. And this was the last continuity change we ever see in the BoJack Horseman title sequence. But let's talk about these final moments that have been in the title sequence all along. BoJack falling backwards into his pool. This has literally been a part of every single season's title sequence, even season 6 when everything changed fundamentally. BoJack falls backwards and sinks down into the depths of his pool, while his friends watch helplessly from above. This is a great metaphor for BoJack drowning in his own self-destruction, but this of course would ultimately hold incredible significance as the events of the penultimate episode of the series, The View from Halfway Down, all take place in BoJack's mind as he nearly drowns in this very pool. BoJack would survive the incident, but the fact that this detail was here for the duration is pretty wild. I stand by the title. This is the greatest title sequence of all time. Not just because it's incredibly cool, but because it's meaningful and has the closest attention to detail of any title sequence I've ever seen in my life. It's representative of how much each and every team member of BoJack Horseman poured into this show. It's incredible that even in its title sequence, BoJack Horseman manages to be a mind-blowing series. I don't think we'll ever see anything like this ever again.
think you got a touch of the ocean madness, Margot.
Margot Martindale is one of the most perplexing but hilarious side characters in the entirety of BoJack Horseman, a true enigma who's as versatile as she is bloodthirsty. Esteemed character actress Margot Martindale has still had her share of life events that make her a worthy addition to the BoJack Horseman timeline. Esteemed character actress Margot Martindale was born on July 18, 1951 in Jacksonville, Texas. After graduating from Jacksonville High School in 1969, Martindale attended the University of Michigan as well as summer courses at Harvard University. She even appeared on stage with future stars of screen, Jonathan Frakes and Christopher Reeve. In the 1980s, esteemed character actress Margot Martindale worked at the Actors Theater in Louisville, Kentucky. In 1988, she got her first on-screen role in a made-for-TV movie called The Child Saver. Between 1988 and 2006, Martindale appeared in countless film and television projects, including The Rocketeer, Lorenzo's Oil, The Firm, Practical Magic, $1 Million Baby, and countless more. In 2007, esteemed character actress Margot Martindale was cast in television series Mitch's Life starring BoJack Horseman and run by prolific showrunner of Krill and Grace, Cuddly Whiskers. She was originally cast as a character named Angel, though the show was eventually reworked into something called The BoJack Horseman Show. This is how Margot met BoJack Horseman. In 2014, esteemed character actress Margot Martindale was recruited by BoJack Horseman to help sabotage a rock opera project written by Todd Chavez. Margot deceptively pointed out a discounted edition of video game Decapathon 7, a game Mr. Chavez was highly addicted to. BoJack later paid Margot for her role in the sabotage.
I don't feel good about what we did here, BoJack.
Later that year, Margot was once again contracted by BoJack to sabotage Diane Wynn and Mr. Peanut Butter's wedding. Dressed as a bank robber, she held them at gunpoint, demanding Diane's engagement ring. Diane initially protested, but they handed it over upon realizing that their love superseded the symbolic nature of the ring. BoJack's plan backfired, and the couple pushed their wedding date to later that week.
Oh, keep the damn thing.
Esteemed character actress Margot Martindale was then arrested by a SWAT team and taken into police custody. Martindale was sentenced to jail time in the Hollywood Hills Supermax prison. Once there, she quickly moved up to the top of the food chain, becoming a model inmate. This is demonstrated by a few details on her discharge documents, which praise her for only biting off one person's finger, starting 2 riots, and still making the finest prison wine in the entire county. Upon her release in July 2015, she was immediately recruited once again by BoJack Horseman. This time, BoJack and director Kelsey Jennings were attempting to shoot a scene for the film Secretariat on the White House set at the Nixon Library. Martindale was recruited as part of the diversion team to lure the police away from the actual library. She, Princess Carolyn, and Todd Chavez broke into a nearby discount art gallery with a cable repairman named Alan, who was also roped into the ordeal. Alan was unfortunately shot in the crossfire, but luckily only his phone received critical damage. Princess Carolyn became completely transfixed by a Thomas Kincaid painting, while esteemed character actress Margot Martindale launched into a shooting match with the police, who recognized her face but couldn't place her name. This brought out a fierce bloodlust in Martindale, who continued her rampage. In this rampage, Martindale fatally wounded 5 police officers, taking a few shots in the arm herself. Martindale escaped the scene of the crime and laid low, even shaving her head and wearing a nondescript wig as a disguise. During this period, she performed regional theater in La Jolla, disappearing into her roles. One of these productions included a lesser-known Tennessee Williams play called The Bitches of Blushing Hills Boulevard.
She's dead.
On June 19, 2015, she received a favorable review of her performance in the San Diego Union Tribune. Worried that she had attracted too much attention to herself once again, character actress Margot Martindale retreated back to the Hollywood Hills. By July 22, 2016, she had been discreetly living on BoJack Horseman's boat for about a year, surviving by stockpiling food and ammunition. She also managed to secure a character arc on The Good Wife undetected, given the immersive power of her performance.
It's called acting. Try it sometime.
Upon being nominated for a San Diego Critics Award, character actress Margot Martindale took BoJack's boat out to international waters to avoid being apprehended again. Aboard the Escape from LA, esteemed character actress Margot Martindale evaded capture at sea for at least 75 days with a giant papier-mâché Todd Chavez head as her only companion. Being away from the mainland warped her perception as she hallucinated verbally abusive conversations with Todd's head.
You want another night in the box?
No! Anything but that!
Then quit your yapping and fix Mama a Sazerac.
She was quickly spotted by the pilots of a reflective blimp promoting Secretariat's Oscar campaign, and soon character actress Margot Martindale was face-to-face with a large pasta shipping vessel barreling right towards her. She played chicken with the ship's crew, ignoring the protests of papier-mâché Todd.
Character actress Margot Martindale ain't afraid of nothing!
The two ships collided, casting crates of pasta into the sea, which were soon cooked by sunlight reflecting off of the Secretariat blimp. In a panic, character actress Margot Martindale confessed her lifelong regrets about adding unnecessary amounts of olive oil to pasta for stickiness control before sinking far down into the ocean. In September 2018, a mysterious woman was found washed up on the beach of a remote convent. She was unresponsive and mute for 2 years, despite the best efforts of a compassionate nun tasked to care for her. As it turned out, this mysterious woman was none other than esteemed character actress Margot Martindale.
I look at your face and think you could be literally anyone.
The nun desperately asked who she was, though character actress Margot Martindale only responded with one word.
BoJack! BoJack!
Esteemed character actress Margot Martindale lived on the convent as Sister Marguerite for 2 years following this event. On October 25th, 2019, she and Mother Superior walked the grounds discussing past sins.
The people I've hurt, the lives I've ruined, are they washed clean as well?
Sister Marguerite dismissed herself in shame for irritating Mother Superior. In a diabolical twist of method acting, character actress Margot Martindale removed her hood and proceeded to immediately steal a car.
When you get to heaven, look up Margot Martindale. I won't be there, but my movies will!
After this, Martindale returned to Hollywood. Here she was contacted by Todd Chavez and his girlfriend Maud to stage a kidnapping ransom to force Todd's estranged mother Helen to finally reconnect with him.
Oh no! Todd's gonna get murdered by a fearsome stranger whose sage, buttery voice simultaneously comforts me and fills me with dread.
Character actress Margot Martindale demanded Helen bring 100 Frito pies as a ransom for his safe return. Margot hoped to make amends for the damage she caused, citing her original hiring by BoJack as the catalyst for her path of destruction. Margot's performance was so convincing that Todd's mother had a panic attack on the spot.
I was too convincing. Oh, if only I wasn't so good at acting.
Upon seeing the renewed bond between Todd and his mother, character actress Margot Martindale found peace within herself and was promptly arrested at the hospital. After delivering her passionately worded testimony to the judge, claiming to have learned from her mistakes, the judge was sympathetic but unconvinced.
That's quite a story. But you've killed a lot of people.
Just before sentencing, indie film director Nicole Holofcener intervenes, begging the judge to let her cast Martindale in a new film. Intrigued, the judge reluctantly dismisses all charges as the two women high-five in victory. Margot Martindale remained an enigma through and through. Despite so few consequences, she racked up a massive rap sheet. Over the course of her various sprees, esteemed character actress Margot Martindale committed the following crimes: trespassing, armed robbery, bribery, property theft, extortion, boating under the influence, 2 counts of vehicular theft, assault with a deadly weapon, impersonation of a cleric, and at least 7 counts of homicide. All told, character actress Margot Martindale should have expected to incur a maximum sentence of up to 6 consecutive life sentences plus 41 years in the state of California for this range of criminal activity. Putting aside her heinous crimes, esteemed character actress Margot Martindale comes out on top and truly shines in every role she's given. From a petty criminal to a penitent nun, esteemed character actress Margot Martindale is an unstoppable tour de force.
Normal words, but a horse guy.
Can we please stop this?
You just asked for specifically that.
I mean, look, I think he has a point. BoJack does use normal words, and he is also a horse guy. I mean, when you're right, you're right. In all seriousness, this Family Guy joke kind of made waves back in October 2019, coincidentally just 1 week before season 6 of BoJack premiered. And I get it, it sure does seem like the most base-level observation Family Guy could make about BoJack Horseman, which honestly, I kind of find funny on its own. Like, don't even try to parody the show. What's this one about? A horse guy saying regular words? But, and hear me out here, what if I told you that Family Guy and BoJack Horseman have more in common than you realize? Now, obviously, they are incredibly different shows. They have vastly different styles of humor, different episode and seasonal structures, they have different goals as adult animated comedy series, but at their core, there is one super specific and super important commonality, and it all has to do with their protagonist's relationship to sitcoms. Okay, so ultimately this is a video about BoJack Horseman, Peter Griffin, and the way sitcoms shaped their worldview, and how both of these TV series can take this exact same kernel of an idea and build something entirely different and unique from it. First, let's talk about BoJack. The cold open of the very first episode really lays out the most important groundwork for what this show is trying to do. First, we get a look at BoJack's former sitcom Horsin Around before he starts to talk about not only the show, but his relationship to it, and how even though real life isn't like this, he pines for the predictability and structure of a sitcom.
Where, you know, no matter what happens, at the end of 30 minutes, Everything's gonna turn out okay.
This really sets the stage for not only BoJack's mindset, but for the series itself. How, despite technically being a sitcom, it won't operate under those typical sitcom rules. It's framing itself as the real-life alternative here. And, as we'll go over, this is illustrated over and over in the series. Now, let's take a peek at Family Guy. I'm going to mostly be looking at the earliest era of the show because that's what I'm most familiar with, but as far as what Family Guy is about, this is something that the homie Toonrific Tariq really helped me realize through covering the show on our podcast and through his great Family Guy videos. Peter Griffin is essentially a character who was raised by old school sitcom TV dads. The Archie Bunkers, the Ralph Cramdens from shows like The Honeymooners, you know, bang, zoom, straight to the moon.
And he was just using space travel as a metaphor for beating his wife.
And Peter is now attempting to live his life and raise a family through the lessons and values instilled in him by those old sitcoms. It's why so many episodes begin with the family on the couch watching TV together. It's why there's a TV in the Family Guy logo. Here's Tariq's breakdown of the Family Guy theme song.
But just off the first line, it's Peter and Lois asking, why aren't things like they used to be? Where did all of the old school TV dads go? What happened to all of the values that we grew up on? Well, lucky for us, there's somebody who still lives by those values. I think Family Guy is saying that a lot of the values that we grew up on are really toxic and when applied to your actual family would not fly.
Man, this is actually the second time I've used this clip from Tariq's video in one of my own videos. I gotta start paying that dude royalties. Actually, wait, hold up. Hey, look, if you wanted a higher rate, you should have negotiated a better deal. But seriously, go watch Tariq's video on what Family Guy is about. It is actually one of my all-time favorites. So Tariq absolutely nails this read, that the theme song itself forecasts the entire idea behind the show. What did happen to those good old-fashioned values on which we used to rely? Well, the answer is that many of them were not good values. But Peter is a character who still tries to live his life through those values. In BoJack's case, it has a bit more to do with his own arrested development.
Well, BoJack stunted too. He got famous in his 20s, so he's gonna be in his 20s forever. After you get famous, you stop growing because you don't have to.
On top of this, he spent 9 years of his life working on Horsin Around. It was actually the most consistent and stable environment he'd ever had in his entire life, due to his parents being generally, bad. So many of the lessons most instilled in BoJack over his life were from his fake TV family, a real departure from his real, awful family. Unfortunately, as this show illustrates, sitcoms are not real life. Real life has actual stakes and real consequences, but so often we see BoJack trying to use those sitcom tropes and concepts to repair and build actual relationships. In BoJack's third episode, Prickly Muffin, BoJack is dealing with the very real issues plaguing his former TV daughter, Sarah Lynn. Rather than getting her the help she needs, he initially enables her, allowing her to crash and party at his place, all while he tries to emulate their relationship from TV. All of BoJack's attempts to connect with Sarah Lynn parallel moments in Horsin Around.
Who wants chocolate chip pancakes?
I do.
Who wants chocolate chip pancakes?
I do.
This is showcased further later in the episode when BoJack's hospitality towards Sarah Lynn reaches a breaking point and he tries to hatch a plan to fix everything.
The kids on Horsin Around didn't need boundaries. All they needed was some good old-fashioned love.
BoJack, this is not a TV show, okay? This is real life.
Rather than addressing the actual issues, BoJack just takes Sarah Lynn for a fun day out at Santa Monica Pier, assuming that spending completely unrelated father-daughter time with her will somehow magically set the boundaries he needs. Instead, as BoJack tries to live out his sitcom moments, real life continues to sneak back into the picture.
I got a feeling everything's gonna be okay.
Hey, did you hear Kazaz got cancer?
The show is constantly illustrating, even this early in its run, that this world is not a typical sitcom world. At the end of 30 minutes, your problems are still going to be there. And for BoJack, they will bleed out into the following episodes. But BoJack trucks along with his sitcom ending, giving Sarah Lynn his TV Guide Award, thinking this grand gesture is the resolution this episode needs.
Na 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 la 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 na 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 la 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 la.
What are you doing?
Shh, just let the credits roll. Let the credits roll.
This moment is particularly divorced from reality. Though the episode has a full 7 minutes remaining, this is where BoJack is hoping it ends, with a credit roll after a sweet moment between characters. And Peter does this kind of stuff in Family Guy all the time.
I want us to have one of those father-son moments, like on TV, you know, where we hug and the music goes, la la la.
Thanks, boys, just like that.
This episode is essentially all about Peter trying to connect to his father, whom he didn't seem to have ever had a real relationship with. He expects that now, after his dad's retirement, they'll finally be able to bond. Instead, his dad doubles down on his awfulness, throwing jabs at Lois for not being Catholic and being generally awful, hating retired life. Peter tries to continually win his father's favor with grand gestures, the same kind you might see on a sitcom, only for each one to go wrong in its own way. First, he gets him a job managing the toy factory where he works, which backfires tremendously as it just enables his abusive behavior in this workplace. So Peter's next grand gesture is to kidnap the Pope to introduce to his father to try and earn his love and respect.
Peter, what is the Pope doing here?
Relax, honey. I just hijacked his bubble car so we can convince my dad I'm a good guy.
Pretty emblematic of that grand gestures will fix everything attitude, right? Of course, even this backfires given his dad's stubbornness.
So I guess you were wrong about me, huh, Dad?
I was wrong, all right.
Stand by, boys.
I was wrong about you.
Peter's dad would rather denounce the Pope than admit that his son is a good, respectable person. Wild. Of course, Family Guy still gives us these kinds of heartwarming, heartstring-tugging moments at the end of these episodes, even if they choose to subvert them while getting there. Obviously, Peter never has to actually reconcile with the fact that he kidnapped the Pope in this one, and he connects with his father in a way. BoJack, on the other hand, chooses to really revel in the lasting consequences of these kinds of actions, both for the characters and the world they live in. In the 6th episode, our A story is a D story. In an attempt to impress and win over Diane's love, BoJack gets drunk and literally steals the D from the Hollywood sign. Realizing he could get in serious trouble for it, he spends most of the episode covering his tracks, and after the D is destroyed en route to its return to the Hollywood Hills, rather than reset everything the following episode as a normal sitcom would, in BoJack Horseman, the D actually remains gone for the rest of the entire series. Every character seamlessly begins to refer to Hollywood as Hollywoo, a pretty clear illustration of this show's relationship to sitcoms and sitcom tropes. Ultimately, both of these series and these main characters are sending up sitcoms in their own way. Family Guy does it with a bit more reverence, since at its core it is still more of a traditional sitcom. While they poke and jab and make fun, it's a show that sits on the shoulders of what came before. Their countless references to older sitcoms obviously only work because their writers and audience are so familiar with those shows and the tropes that came with them. This is pretty perfectly highlighted in season 4's The Father, the Son, and the Holy Fonz, where Peter chooses to form his own religion, and the figure he opts to worship is Arthur Fonzarelli himself.
The Fonz be with you.
And also with you.
Let us
In a lot of ways, TV does take the place of religion in some people's lives. It's a weekly telling of stories and allegories that everyone shares together, and then they can talk about them afterwards. Peter is clearly far more familiar with these old sitcoms than he is with any other form of religion. It's the North Star he's used to guide him through life. And this is obviously, though differently, very true for BoJack as well. Because of the lack of stability in his life and the abusive nature of his parents, he ultimately used the lessons he learned on Horsin Around as a tool to guide him through life, which led to his own massive issues in coping with the actual conflicts he was faced with. After his best friend and showrunner Herb Kazaz was unfairly fired, BoJack not only didn't have his back, but didn't even call him for 20 years afterward. He didn't reach out until he found out that Herb was dying of cancer. Before Herb dies, they do spend a lovely afternoon together. They catch up, they laugh, they joke, it's like old times. And BoJack expects that this is going to be the happy ending in his story with Herb, that even after all the turmoil and years of not speaking, he'd apologize and they'd bury the hatchet. He would be able to move on knowing that they reconnected. But life is not a sitcom.
So, you're apologizing?
Yes. I'm sorry.
Okay. I don't forgive you.
Herb, I said I'm sorry.
Yeah. And I do not forgive you.
I think this pretty perfectly illustrates how BoJack and Family Guy both approach a really similar core principle in entirely different ways. In Family Guy, Peter's reverence for old sitcoms and those good old-fashioned values are essentially presented as an excuse for his bad behavior, Peter's justification for acting that way. And while the show often illustrates how comically wrong that kind of behavior can be, it still presents itself in a sitcom package, where at the end of 30 minutes, things do work out for everyone. BoJack the character doesn't approach the world through a sitcom lens because of his values or as a way to justify his bad behavior. It's because he's a stunted individual who was dealt some really rough cards as a child. Being the horse on Horsin Around was one of the only stable periods in his entire life. It's one of the only things he has to fall back on when navigating his real life issues and relationships. It's the only way he knows how to approach conflict, which obviously is not actually useful at all. And for that reason, we don't see happy sitcom endings in BoJack. We see lingering issues and consequences that don't get resolution until BoJack actually learns how to grow and deal with his problems in a healthy way. There are some other pretty wild connections between these series as well. Both have an episode that is primarily one character giving a monologue for the entirety of the episode, in BoJack's Free Churro and Family Guy's Send in Stewie Please. Both have a near-death experience episode in BoJack's The View from Halfway Down and Family Guy's Are You There, God? It's Me, Peter, though obviously they're mostly just similar conceptually, and because these shows are very different, they approach these concepts very differently. I just really thought that this core idea is such an interesting connection between these shows, that they can have such a similar concept as a foundational aspect of their existence and both approach them in drastically different ways. It's honestly a testament to creativity. No idea can only be done one single way. And it's also fascinating how people's perceptions of shows can be so different. I bet most of you clicked this video thinking, those shows have nothing in common, and I wouldn't blame you, they are very different shows. But obviously, art in general is mostly about what the person experiencing that art gets out of it. Some people might be asked what BoJack is about and say it's profound, that it's ironically the most human show on TV, that it helps people realize things about themselves that they couldn't verbalize. And some people might just say that it's normal words, but a horse guy. In 1987, situational comedy Horsin Around premiered on ABC. Or, you know, in the world of BoJack Horseman it did. Throughout the series, Horsin Around represents BoJack's sort of pseudo-childhood. His actual childhood was so awful, he looks back on his time in this completely fabricated sitcom world as the happiest of his life, something that helps explain his very warped worldview. But Horsin Around ran for 9 seasons, and overall, we see very little of it. But there are so many little scenes, offhanded lines, jokes, and sequences that give us a ton of insight into some of the things that series did over those 9 seasons. So today, I want to look at the entire history of the program and try my best to piece together every known episode, storyline, moment, piece of behind-the-scenes information, and place it all in a timeline. In other words, we were lost, but now we're found, and we're horsing around. First, let's go over the events that led to the creation of the series. In 1985, comedians Herb Kazaz and BoJack Horseman met at the Laugh Shack after Herb heckled BoJack's set. BoJack did not take kindly to this initial interaction.
Get cancer, jerkwad.
However, despite this, after giving BoJack some advice, the pair became close friends. The following year, in 1986, Herb and BoJack each performed another set at the Laugh Shack, but this time in front of ABC network executives, including Angela Diaz.
That's Angela Diaz. She's the woman who made pantsuits a thing.
After the set, Herb was invited to an industry party at the La Brea Tar Pits. While there, he soft-pitched his sitcom idea to those network executives. After further meetings, the executives greenlit Herb's show, Horsin Around. Herb pitched BoJack Horseman as the star, and though they had reservations, the execs eventually agreed. Herb took BoJack to Griffith Observatory to break the news to him.
And I told those suits, if they want my show, then that horse is gonna be BJ goddamn Horseman.
Despite this good news, the networks dragged their feet on casting BoJack, forcing him to do a screen test. While chatting about this outside the Laugh Shack, Herb assured BoJack that this was just a formality. When they eventually did the screen test, it was Herb's direction that really made BoJack shine.
You're nervous? Forget the script.
Okay.
We're gonna do that movie that you're always making me watch. You know... You have to answer for the chimpanzee, Tino.
After this, BoJack officially landed the lead role in Horsin Around, and production began. Horsin Around is a sitcom about a horse who adopts 3 orphans of different ages. The oldest, Olivia, played by Joelle Clark, the middle, Ethan, played by Bradley Hitler Smith, and the youngest, Sabrina, played by future superstar Sarah Lynn. We don't know much about Joelle or Bradley's home lives before Horsin Around, but we know that Sarah Lynn was born in 1984, meaning she was only 3 years old when she shot the Horsin Around pilot in 1987. We also know that her real name is Sarah Himmelfarb and was changed to Sarah Lynn for her acting career, as well as the fact that her mother clearly was the one who made the decision for Sarah Lynn to be a child actress. Her mother Carol also used questionable tactics to get her daughter roles.
Mommy didn't do what Mommy did to that Star Search producer so that you could be an architect.
The series likely takes place in a suburb outside of Chicago, or perhaps on the outskirts of the city itself, but the intro to the show shows the Chicago Theater, Buckingham Fountain, the Hancock Building on the lakefront. All of these are major Chicago iconography. When the horse goes to work, they show the Chicago skyline, so we know that he works in Chicago at the very least. The BoJack Horseman fandom wiki claims that the series takes place in Omro, Wisconsin, but I cannot for the life of me find any reference to this location anywhere across BoJack Horseman. I think it is simply wrong. As for the characters, the horse is likely in his mid-20s, as was BoJack when he began the role. As we mentioned before, the horse works in Chicago at a company called Libertor & Associates Incorporated. His boss is Mr. Libertor himself, who is never shown on screen, only via phone or over the intercom. The voice of Mr. Libertor is played by series creator Herb Kazaz. The horse has one pretty common catchphrase: "I've heard of blank, but this is ridiculous." You'll hear that clip a lot over the course of this video. Olivia is the oldest and most level-headed orphan adopted by the horse. When the show begins, she seems to be in high school, which likely means that over the course of the series, she went to college and maybe even graduated by the end of the show. We'll estimate that she's 14 or 15 years old when the series begins. Ethan is the middle nerdy child who was likely in late elementary school or early middle school when the show began. I would guess around 10 years old. This means over the course of the series, he went through high school and maybe even entered college. Ethan has one catchphrase that does not seem to be a fan favorite.
Yowza, yowza, bobowza!
Sabrina is the super cute youngest child. Though she looks older and can speak in pretty complete sentences, Sarah Lynn was canonically 3 years old when the series began, meaning when the show ended, she was 12 and in middle school. She also has a very popular catchphrase.
That's too much, man.
The other recurring characters we see are Goober, the annoying neighbor boy, accompanied by this common shared catchphrase aimed in his direction.
Go home, Goober. Yeah, go home, Goober.
Goober sucks. Why doesn't he ever go home?
And the only other recurring character we see is Tracy, the secretary for Libertor & Associates Incorporated, where the horse works. The pair seem to have a flirtatious relationship. The series pilot shot and aired in 1987, and the show ran for 9 seasons. Now, if we look at similar sitcoms from that time, I think we can get a good idea of Horsin Around's release windows. The closest parallel is definitely going to be Full House, a similar sitcom that began in 1987, also aired on ABC, and ran 8 seasons through 1995. Nearly every season of that show began in September and ended the following year in May. Other ABC sitcoms that aired in the 90s, like Home Improvement and Family Matters, also mostly aired September to May. So I think we can assume that Horsin Around likely aired from September 1987 to May 1996, though there are some possible contradictions here that we'll go over later. This would mean season 1 aired September 87 to May 88, season 2 aired September 88 to May 89, season 3 September 89 to May 90, etc., etc. The series can generally be split into 2 eras. The Herb Kazaz era, which was likely seasons 1 through 7, as Herb was unceremoniously fired in 1994. It's likely he worked a bit on season 8 before he was fired, and then for seasons 8 and 9, showrunner Danny Bananas took over the show. As was true of many sitcoms, there was likely a rotation of directors across the series. We know of 2, one whose last name was Sindrada, as seen on a slate, and then we know that some episodes were actually directed by Herb Kazaz himself. Also, because the way we see the show is animated, we often have to primarily judge when some of these episodes take place based on the character models. There are really only 2 character models per character for the Horsin Around kids across the series, the younger models and the older models, as well as the 2 character models for Herb Kazaz when he's seen on set. The latest episode with the young models we have a firm filming date for is 1993, so I'm going to say that the younger models ran from seasons 1 to 6, and the older models were for the last 3 seasons, 7, 8, and 9. This will help us build out a timeline and place some of these episodes within that timeline. So let's start looking at some of the stories chronologically. We don't know a ton about the pilot, but we do know that it revolves around Sarah Lynn breaking the horse's expensive bachelor vase, which makes sense as a story for the pilot, symbolically breaking the horse's previous bachelor lifestyle as he adopts the trio of kids, and the horse forgiving them, of course.
I've learned that when you're in a loving family, there's nothing wrong with a little horsing around.
After completing the pilot, Herb gave a little speech to the small cast, insisting that no matter how successful the show gets, that they should all stick together. We also see this joke that could have really fit into any episode, but feels like a season 1 gag.
Oh, hey.
Where? I love hay.
Season 1 also likely contained this episode about BoJack's birthday, of which we see a few scenes out of order. First, I think this is likely the cold open.
What happened to my birthday cake?
Goober.
Next, we see the climax, where Sabrina tries to make BoJack spaghetti for his birthday, but makes too much and it explodes throughout the entire kitchen.
I've heard of pasta point of no return, but this is ridiculous.
And finally, the wrap-up scene between the two. Sabrina is worried that the horse wouldn't love her if he knew that she made a big mess, rounding out the episode with one of those ah moments.
We're a family now, no matter what, and I will always be there for you.
I think we can pretty definitively say this is a season 1 episode, considering in this final speech, the horse says we're a family now, implying that this is a more recent development. And of course, the show has to go out on a laugh.
I gotta eat all that? That's too much, man!
This is one of the most complete stories we know of in the history of Horsin' Around, only eclipsed by the next episode, which is Sabrina's Christmas Wish, the season 1 Christmas special, which can be basically seen in its entirety in the BoJack Christmas special on Netflix, which is listed separately from the series, so if this is the first you're hearing of it, go check it out, it's fun. Sabrina's Christmas Wish has a pretty straightforward premise. It's the first Christmas the kids have spent with the horse, and all 3 kids have actually never had a Christmas before. The A story revolves around, as the title suggests, Sabrina's Christmas Wish. But since she has never had a Christmas and doesn't understand Santa, she wishes for something unrealistic.
Santa, I want my mommy and daddy to come back!
The episode also has 2 tangential B and C stories. Joelle is trying to convince the horse to get her an expensive leather jacket for Christmas.
Well, I've heard of a one-jacket mind, but this is ridiculous.
And the more important side story that intertwines with the A-plot, BoJack's boss, Mr. Libertor, wants him to work on Christmas in order to make partner.
If you want to be made partner, you'll have to show some initiative.
This all culminates in a very sweet scene at the end. After Sabrina is upset that Santa didn't bring her parents back, the horse tells her the truth about Santa Claus, and then gives her a set of pencils with her name on it, relating to a story she told about having to share her pencils at the orphanage.
Maybe it's just because I never had a Christmas before, but this is the best Christmas I've ever had.
Me too.
And this, of course, makes the horse realize that in his new life, he has to be willing to sacrifice his time at work for his loved ones. He tells Mr. Libertor he won't come in on Christmas, which of course secures him the partnership. It's a pretty nice, albeit slightly subversive Christmas special, and BoJack does confirm that there was a Christmas special every single season following this, meaning there are 8 more Christmas specials, the details of which are unknown to us. Alright, on to season 2. This is the only episode where we know the exact episode number and title. Season 2, episode 12, I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. Dementia.
This old man followed me home from the park. Can I keep him?
The horse objects until Ethan mentions that the old man's daughter is a bikini model, suggesting that though the show is family-focused with BoJack and the kids, much of the horse's motivation revolves around the fact that he is a single guy. This was an episode that BoJack showed to his mother Beatrice on DVD while she was in a nursing home, and shortly after, they watched another episode, so I think we can assume that this other episode was also a season 2 story, where the horse accidentally walks in on Olivia while she's naked.
And since you saw me naked, that means I get to see you naked.
Something tells me I'm gonna regret this.
There's also an episode where Olivia is teaching BoJack some of the modern slang that he isn't familiar with.
So let me get this straight. Bad means good?
Maybe you should leave the teen talk to me. Jeezy kableezy.
We know that Beatrice came to see this taping of the show, and there's a scene where BoJack talks to Herb about this, and it confirms that it takes place in 1988, which likely means that this was being taped for season 2. And lastly, there's an episode where Olivia goes to prom, though the horse has an issue with her dress.
You don't think it's cute?
No way, Jose.
This maybe could have been in season 1, but prom is generally for juniors and seniors in high school, so I think it's more likely that Olivia was a tiny bit older when this story took place. Behind the scenes, around this same time, BoJack actually began hooking up with Bradley Hitler Smith's mother. Bradley expressed his discomfort with this to Herb, and eventually his parents actually got a divorce, separating the Hitlers from the Smiths, presumably. Okay, on to season 3, which is a fascinating season to break down because we only know one major thing about this season.
In season 3 of Horsin' Around, the horse got elected president and we shot on location.
That location they shot on being the Nixon Library Oval Office in Yorba Linda. Furthermore, BoJack seems to imply that this was the case for many episodes, as he says it was just for season 3.
They called my airplane Air Horse 1, and the vice president was a hip-hop zebra named Zebro.
Come on.
However, I think we can assume that this happened later in season 3 because of another episode. We are presuming that season 3 aired from fall 1989 to May 1990. And there is one episode that we have a firm filming date as seen on the slate, July 12th, 1989, which almost certainly means this was an episode being shot to air in season 3. Therefore, this episode must have aired before the horse was elected president. In this episode, international supermodel Cindy Crawfish's private jet crash lands in the horse's backyard, and the pair of them strike up a romance. However, Sabrina runs away when she realizes that Cindy Crawfish isn't going to be her new mommy.
Holy sheet! I've heard of being at the end of my rope. but this is ridiculous.
So I think we can assume that this episode aired earlier in season 3, and then later in the season, the horse was elected president, where they largely shot on the Oval Office set in Yorba Linda. However, for season 4, the horse wakes up, realizing that it was all a dream, he was never president, which does make sense since the seasons did not air during election years. Also airing in season 4 is a bit of a confusing episode timeline-wise. The episode where Sabrina is afraid to go to her first day of kindergarten. There's a few reasons this is confusing. The way this episode is presented in season 1 of BoJack, along with some of the references, make it seem like this would be a season 1 episode for Horsin Around, especially this reference.
Didn't you already eat your pancakes?
As Oliver North would say, I do not recall.
Oliver North famously said, "I do not recall," many times in the hearings for the Iran-Contra affair, a Reagan-era scandal, with the hearings taking place in 1987. This would make this a very topical joke in 1987. However, the BoJack Horseman episode in which this takes place jumps ahead 12 years after this scene to show Sarah Lynn at 18 years old, and then jumps ahead another 12 years to when she's 30 years old, canonically taking place in 2014. This would firmly place the initial scene in question 24 years prior in 1990. This makes much more sense with Sarah Lynn's age, being 6 years old, much closer to kindergarten age than when she was 3 in season 1, and also likely places the episode in season 4, despite the 1987 Oliver North reference. We actually see a couple scenes from this episode. First, Sabrina hiding because she doesn't want to go to school.
Olivia told me sometimes at school they have pop quizzes. I don't want a pop!
And then interestingly, we actually saw another scene of this episode in the pilot of BoJack, 2 episodes prior to when we saw these scenes. Sabrina is still scared and asks the horse if she can stay home with him.
But you're a big girl now, and you have to be brave.
Okay, Daddy.
Wait, did you just call me Daddy?
This seems to mark a major milestone in the horse's relationship with Sabrina, calling him Daddy for the first time in 4 seasons. Sometime between the back half of season 4 and front half of season 5 in 1991, BoJack became so popular that they released his own music track and accompanying dance called the BoJack, which took the nation by storm.
Now, boys and girls, if you want to do the BoJack, take your hands and put them on your... This sucks!
I wasn't able to place any episodes specifically into season 5, but this seems like a good place to mention a few episode premises that I couldn't find exact placements for, but likely took place earlier in the run. BoJack mentions this episode when hooking up with a Manatee Fair writer.
Remember that episode of Horsin Around where Sabrina wanted to be a mermaid?
What? I don't want to think about that show.
Todd reminisces with BoJack about a couple of important episodes when they watched Sabrina's Christmas Witch. The first, a Sabrina-focused episode that made important cultural strides.
The episode where Sabrina had a black friend really started the conversation about racism.
And the other was an Ethan-focused episode leaning into his nerdier side.
And the episode where Ethan looked directly at a solar eclipse really started the conversation about not looking directly at a solar eclipse.
We see a short clip of an early episode where Sarah Lynn gets her hand caught in a gumball machine at the mall.
Oh, that's too much, man!
Diane mentions this Olivia-focused episode that feels like would have taken place early since she was still in high school.
We're at the one where Olivia does the school project where she pretends an egg is a baby. Spoiler alert, Ethan needs to make an omelet.
Sarah Lynn mentions a Halloween episode to BoJack that I think likely took place somewhere around the middle of the series.
What about the one where the writers made Joelle dress up like a pumpkin and the whole episode was fat jokes and then Joelle got an eating disorder?
This is also a pretty brutal insight into how child stardom negatively impacted these kids. Joelle apparently had to go to a clinic and missed 5 episodes during that period. BoJack also mentions an episode called Goober Goes Home, obviously playing on the oft-repeated catchphrase, "Go home, Goober."
But that was because we were on a softball team together and the home was home plate.
And lastly, BoJack describes another episode in season 3's That's Too Much Man.
This is just like the episode of Horsin Around when Olivia went to the frat party.
But Penny doesn't have a kind angel played by Jose Canseco to help her get out of this jam.
This is a tough one to place. It could imply this is while Olivia is at college, which would place it later in the run, but it also could imply she was still in high school since she shouldn't have been at the frat party. Also, Jose Canseco was at the height of his baseball fame in the late 80s and early 90s, which would make this more of a season 3 through 6 episode, but he also didn't start guest starring on sitcoms until the mid to late 90s, which might place it later. Season 6 is the final season where we have confirmed appearances of the younger character models, based on 2 clips. One is pretty generic as shown at the 1994 Animal Choice Awards. These awards are a parody of the People's Choice Awards, which take place early in the year and showcase film and TV from the year prior. Therefore, since this is the 1994 show, this clip is likely from early 1993, which would place it in season 6.
Now that's what I call
Horsin Around.
The next is an episode that I would have expected to take place in the 80s, where Olivia puts too much detergent in the washer and First Lady Nancy Reagan guest stars to help fix it. Nancy Reagan previously had guest starred on Different Strokes in 1983, so I figured this was also while she was living in the White House. However, in the context of the episode where we learn this information, it's revealed that Princess Carolyn was at this taping right after she started working for her old boss, Marv Sparbory, and we know that PC came to Los Angeles in 1993. That makes this the latest confirmed appearance of these younger character models. I also expect that this was an episode shot in early 1993, and with a big guest star like Nancy Reagan, that really feels like a sweeps week stunt to me, so I think this was probably meant to air in May, towards the end of season 6 of Horsin Around. Speaking of the end of season 6, during his eulogy for his mother, BoJack also mentions the season 6 finale, an episode where Olivia finally meets her birth mother and contemplates moving to California with her. This was a season-ending cliffhanger. It was followed up in the season 7 premiere, where Olivia's mother relapsed and she had to go on a road trip with Mr. T, Alf, and the cast of Stomp to get back home. Everything from here on we can place in the back part of the series because the character models have aged up, plus with some other context clues we can place them a little more specifically. Next is the episode where Goober's cousin comes to town and they all learn about the Armenian genocide. Sarah Lynn also tells BoJack that Bradley had a boner during the entire filming of this episode because Erica Eleniak guest starred as Goober's cousin. I think this makes the most sense to fit into season 7 because A, the characters all have their older models, and B, Erica Eleniak would have been fresh off of her stint on Baywatch, so this time frame lines up pretty well. We also know that towards the end of season 7, Angela Diaz forced BoJack to perform the BoJack dance at the 1994 upfronts. Next we have season 8, which is probably the most important in the show's history behind the scenes. It's very likely that show creator Herb Kazaz began work on season 8 before Scandal rocked the series. During this first half of the season, BoJack insisted that the writers write a rap for him. This was likely due to the rise in popularity of shows like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
And then it goes, I like healthy gums in a major way.
We also know that in season 8, episode 4, the series introduced the horse's identical cousin, presumably also played by BoJack. It was clear by this point that Herb and BoJack weren't as close, and BoJack was a bit of a diva on set, often complaining about the scripts.
But I'm not doing it for Herb. I'm doing it for the fans.
And your $30K an episode.
Unfortunately, this volatile period in their relationship was when Herb's scandal hit the airwaves.
Herb Kazaz, the show's creator, was caught tonight in an LAPD sting on public indecency.
Herb was a closeted gay man running a family program, and this was generally not accepted by the public at the time. The network decided to fire Herb from the series. Before this was made official, Herb begged BoJack to have his back and threatened to walk without Herb on board. BoJack agreed to this.
You can count on me, Herb. I mean, I wouldn't even be here if it weren't for you.
Unfortunately, with an incredibly strong bluff, Angela Diaz convinces BoJack to stay on board by basically threatening his future career, convincing him the entire show would end if he stuck by his friend. BoJack betrays Herb, and the show continues. Herb is then replaced by veteran showrunner Danny Bananas, who meets with BoJack shortly after this at a diner. We know this event likely takes place in late 1994 due to the Pup Fiction billboard in this scene, which means Danny ran the series for the last season and a half or so. Around this time, Sarah Lynn started having issues with her stepfather, with the series pretty heavily implying that she was being sexually abused. Because of this, she had her hair done in BoJack's trailer one day. After expressing that she missed Herb, BoJack got very defensive about his decision.
I'm just saying I miss him.
And I'm just saying, it's not my fault he got fired. So I don't know why you're complaining to me.
BoJack then left a bottle of vodka unattended in his dressing room, which Sarah Lynn drank, getting drunk for the first time at only 10 years old. She has to be sent home for the day, and the storyline about Sabrina sneaking to the horse's office in his suitcase is changed. Danny confronts BoJack about this later, ensuring that he is not to blame for the incident.
Because if it was, we're all in real trouble. You get what I'm saying.
BoJack and Danny pinned the blame on hairstylist Sharona, who was unfairly fired from the show shortly after this. The last episode that we can likely place in season 8 is another about the horse's birthday. In this one, all three of the kids forget to get him a present because they're all caught up in their own stuff. Ethan was running for class president, Sabrina was boy crazy, and thanks to Olivia's story, I think we can place this timeline-wise.
I got so distracted by trying to get tickets to the New Kids on the Block concert, I completely lost sight of what's important.
Since these are the older models, we know it's in the last 3 seasons, and the New Kids on the Block had their final tour in 1994. In my mind, I think we can assume that this was written and shot in 1994 as the band was planning their final tour. Olivia wanted to get tickets since it was her last chance, though it's also possible this was in season 7. And on to the final season of Horsin Around, season 9. After being fired from the series, Herb still kept in touch with much of the cast, though of course not BoJack. He still clearly held a grudge, even scrapbooking bad reviews of the show. He would end up giving Joelle advice, suggesting that she should maybe consider theater. We also know that during this final season, the writers were pushing Sabrina to the forefront of the show more often due to Sarah Lynn's popularity as a teenage idol starting to skyrocket. This made Joelle deeply jealous, and she lashed out at Sarah Lynn, sadly at a time in Sarah Lynn's life where she needed more support.
Want to go to the mall this weekend?
Don't you have any friends your own age from school?
No, my mom's boyfriend homeschools me. He's a photographer.
Herb also tried to nudge Joelle into being more supportive of Sarah Lynn.
Hey, be nicer to Sarah Lynn, will ya? She didn't choose this life.
This interaction seemed to have taken place during a Halloween episode, with Sabrina dressed up as an angel and Olivia as a devil. However, the scene also creates probably one of the most difficult timeline contradictions. During this sequence, Herb makes this reference.
What are the writers doing to my baby? Are they killing it? Are they putting my baby into a car, then driving the car into a lake? Topical! I still got it!
This is in reference to Susan Leigh Smith, who did this very thing to her 2 children in 1994. The trial began in July 1995, which is when it would be most topical in the news cycle, which lines up perfectly with this timeline, setting this shoot in summer 1995, a season 9 episode that would air on Halloween later that year. However, the newspaper Sarah Lynn is reading says Lakers signed Shaquille O'Neal. Shaq was signed to the Lakers in July of 1996, not 1995. However, if this was 1996, Horsin Around would have already finished filming and airing already. So the takeaway here is that Shaq signed with the Lakers 1 year earlier in the BoJack universe. Speaking of big sensational trials, season 9 also featured an episode with major allusions to probably the most infamous sensational trial in American history, the O.J. Simpson case. This episode has a lot going on. Sabrina and the horse seemingly go to a concert where the horse gets on stage and does a very bad guitar solo.
You completely humiliated me in front of Sean enough.
This deeply upsets Sabrina. She calls the horse a terrible father, and then O.J. Simpson lawyer and DNA expert Barry Scheck's car breaks down in front of their house. Sabrina wants to know if she can find her real family using DNA.
Was Simpson DNA found at the scene of the murder of Nicole Brown? Sure. Was it O.J. Simpson's DNA? Who's to say?
This is a fascinating guest role. The O.J. Simpson trial would have ended in October 1995. It's not clear if this episode aired after the case, as Barry Scheck would have been very busy on the case, or if it was done to try and help sway the court of public opinion in O.J.'s favor. Makes me wonder if Danny Bananas was friends with O.J., or at the very least an exec at ABC. Either way, it's one of the strangest creative choices ever made by the series' second showrunner. But perhaps not the strangest, because this brings us to the Horsin Around series finale. The entire series of Horsin Around ends with the horse dying in a hospital as the kids sit in the waiting room.
He died of a broken heart because you didn't appreciate him enough. And now he's gone forever.
Devastated and alone, the kids huddle in fear, not knowing what's going to come next for them.
I'm required to hand you over to the Child Protective Services. You're the state's problem now.
Now, this part barely makes sense at all, considering Ethan and Olivia were almost certainly legal adults by this point, but who's to say what would happen to poor Sabrina, honestly? Even BoJack later remarked that they may have gone too dark for that series finale, and that is how Horsin Around ended, but its legacy would live on for better and worse. Mostly worse. After the series ended, Sarah Lynn continued to rise into superstardom as a pop sensation. Joelle Clark moved to London and began doing theater on the West End, thanks to Herb's encouragement, and Bradley Hitler Smith eventually opened a hardware store in Olympia called Tools. BoJack struggled immensely to be seen as anything more than the horse from Horsin Around, despite numerous attempts to change his image. In 2007, he starred in a series called The BoJack Horseman Show. In the pilot episode, BoJack takes a dump on a Horsin Around VHS. This was a massive miscalculation, and the series was a failure commercially and critically. Herb also struggled to feel as though he had a legacy beyond Horsin Around, and was later diagnosed with rectal cancer. Before he died, he wrote a book and asked Sarah Lynn if she could make sure that it got published after his death. In 2014, BoJack reconnected with Sarah Lynn. Trying to relive his Horsin Around days, BoJack enabled Sarah Lynn's addiction and let her party at his house. During this period, the pair became intimate and had sex. Eventually, BoJack kicked her out. Shortly after this, BoJack attempted to reconnect with Herb and apologize. The pair had not spoken in the 20 years since Herb's firing.
You got something to say to me? You come out to Malibu and say it to my face.
BoJack visited Herb in Malibu, and the pair generally had a nice time. Before he left, BoJack attempted to properly apologize to Herb, an apology that Herb did not accept.
What I needed then was a friend. And you abandoned me. And I will never forgive you for that.
On the way out of the house, BoJack and Herb physically fought over the telescope from the observatory. This event was recounted in BoJack's eventual book, One Trick Pony. Herb ended up dying in 2015. At his funeral, the cast of Horsin Around reunited for the first time in years. The gang ended up on a treasure hunt across Los Angeles, attempting to find Herb's gold, which turned out to be the book that he had written. The book was actually stolen by Herb's friend Henry Winkler, who wanted to prevent it from being released to protect Herb's legacy because the book was very bad. This was the last time the entire cast of Horsin Around would all be together in the same place. In late 2015, Bradley Hitler Smith began contacting his castmates about a potential sequel series to Horsin Around called Ethan Around. This time, Ethan adopts 3 young horses. He contacted Sarah Lynn and presumably Joelle Clark about the show, but not BoJack.
I would love for you to be part of it, but the horse died in the series finale.
So, we could write around that.
BoJack strung Bradley along about joining the series before breaking things off. Shortly after this, BoJack and Sarah Lynn went on a months-long bender, drinking, doing drugs, and driving back and forth across the country. At the end of the bender, they ended up at the Griffith Observatory, where Sarah Lynn passed out from a heroin overdose. Rather than immediately call for help, BoJack called his own phone from Sarah Lynn's phone and then waited 17 minutes to contact emergency services to make it seem like he wasn't with Sarah Lynn when she overdosed. He drove to the hospital where Sarah Lynn was pronounced dead at 31 years old. After the funeral, BoJack decided he did want to help Bradley make Ethan Around, and later in 2016, they went into production on the pilot. They somehow wrote around the horse's death at the end of the first series, and while rehearsing, BoJack actually helped punch up Ethan's script and planned out some of the comedic beats for the upcoming episode.
Let's try it.
Well, that went well. Oh my God, chill.
While filming the pilot of Ethan Around, BoJack asked Chloe, an actress who played one of the young horses, what she wanted to be when she grows up.
What do you mean? I want to be like you.
Like me?
I want to be famous.
Oh no.
This response sent BoJack into an existential spiral, fearing he'd create another Sarah Lynn situation, and he fled the set. It remains unclear if the pilot for Ethan Around was ever completed in any form. Not long after this, a mini-series about the events of Sarah Lynn's death was produced called American Dead Girl: The Sarah Lynn Story. Paul Giamatti starred as BoJack.
We were lost, now we're found, and we're... Oh, God.
In 2020, a reporter named Paige Sinclair investigated the events surrounding Sarah Lynn's death. She eventually uncovered the truth, that BoJack had been with her for the events leading up to her death. To try and get in front of the story, BoJack did 2 interviews with journalist Biscuits Braxby. The first went in BoJack's favor, but Biscuits was harsher during the second one. Many of BoJack's less savory moments in his life were revealed, including admitting to the fact that he had slept with Sarah Lynn later in life. These interviews led to BoJack's public cancellation. Not long after this, Angela Diaz invited BoJack to her house to discuss something. While there, she revealed the unreleasable Horsin Around Blu-ray sets. Since these were unreleasable, they were attempting to edit the horse out of the entire sitcom, creating a new 8-minute per episode experience just about the kids.
Living without any adult supervision, who learn that wisdom and guidance can be found everywhere. It's all around.
In order to make this happen, BoJack signed his back-end residuals away for a lump sum. This is also when BoJack learned that Angela was bluffing when she fired Herb, and that if he had just stuck by his friend, he likely would have been able to stay on the series. This is the last piece of information we learn in relation to Horsin Around. Presumably, the show was eventually re-released in its BoJackless form. And that is as complete of a history of Horsin Around as we can possibly string together. Though we were laughing and learning and loving a lot, given the tragic events surrounding much of the cast, it's hard to say every new day was a dream. I meant for this to be a pretty simple breakdown of everything we know about Horsin Around, and somehow it turned into this major red yarn corkboard investigative piece, and honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. I hope you enjoyed it. Peace.